So like I said, we have talked about 3 different ways you can get a car or a vehicle, I should say, and that's purchasing a new vehicle, leasing a new vehicle, or purchasing a used vehicle. And we talked about the different costs associated with it, and we compared them, the you know the cost of leasing versus the cost of purchasing. Now that we've taken care of all that, we're just going to talk about a couple of things in terms of maintaining a vehicle once you have it. So now you've got the vehicle. This lesson, we're going to talk about fuel economy of the vehicle. We're going to talk about maintenance of the vehicle, as well as depreciation of the vehicle. And then in the last lesson of the unit, we'll talk about insuring the vehicle, which was very similar, like when we talked about house financing, insuring your home. So starting with fuel economy, this is something that you want to know about the vehicle that you have or the vehicle that you're considering, okay? And that's basically, they basically call it gas mileage. Although technically gas mileage is what they use in the States, because we don't use mileage, we use kilometers. So when they talk about gas mileage, they talk about how many miles is your vehicle getting to the gallon of gas, okay? But in Canada, we actually talk about how many liters of gas is your vehicle using every 100 kilometers you drive. And that's what we refer to as the fuel consumption rate. So you can see I've given you example there, 7.4 liters per 100 kilometers means that you use 7.4 liters of gas in order to drive 100 kilometers, okay? And most vehicles put some sort of fuel consumption rate, like new vehicles, or if you're leasing a vehicle, you should be able to get an idea of the fuel consumption rate. So obviously, the lower number of liters per 100 kilometers, the better fuel consumption your vehicle has, right? So, and there's a lot of factors that come into how much or how good your fuel consumption is, and it's the type of vehicle you own. I mean, if you own a small car with a 4-cylinder engine, you're going to get good mileage. I'll just say mileage, okay? If you own a huge SUV that's like an 8-cylinder, which means it has a very powerful engine, essentially, then you're not going to get very good gas mileage, or your fuel consumption rate is going to be pretty high, okay? When you drive, generally, if you drive in the winter, you usually use more fuel as opposed to the spring, summer, fall. How you drive, are you a lead foot? Like when you start, if you're waiting at a red light and the light turns green, do you just slam on the accelerator? That's going to waste fuel, okay? I've already talked about the type and the condition, obviously, of the vehicle. If it's not in great condition, your fuel consumption rate won't be as good. Okay, here's the formula. How do we calculate fuel consumption rates? And this is something that I believe it will be on, I still have to I looked at the formula sheet for your provincial exam, and you get a lot of formulas. And this is one of the formulas that are on it. In addition to that formula sheet, you also get a reference sheet. So we're going to have to, so we'll talk later on in the later months about I'll show you what the formula sheet looks like, and then we'll want to build a reference sheet from that. Okay, because I mean, we don't want to just rewrite everything that's on the formula sheet on our reference sheet. So the fuel consumption rate, how do you calculate it? It is the liters of gas required or used divided by how many kilometers you drive, so the kilometers driven, times 100 because we want to express it for every 100 kilometers. So that's, like I said, you'll likely be given that formula, and even if you're not given that formula, we can put it on a reference sheet to help you prepare. So, fairly basic calculations involving calculating fuel consumption rate. Okay. So if you drive a vehicle at 60 kilometers an hour, the vehicle is going to use 18.4 liters of gas to drive 225 kilometers. If you drive 100 kilometers an hour, the vehicle is going to use 22.1 liters gas to drive 225 kilometers. So we want to calculate the fuel consumption rate at each speed. Obviously, the fuel consumption rate, just by looking at the question, is going to be better for the lower speed because you use less liters. Okay? So a lot of times we can just call it FCR. That's for fuel consumption rate. So fuel consumption rate. And that will equal the amount of gas you use in liters, or the amount that's required to drive that distance, divided by the distance, times by 100 to express it for every 100 kilometers. And we get 8.2, and you have to put the units here, 8.2 liters per 100 kilometers. That's the complete answer. Okay. At 100 kilometers an hour, well, it's going to be how much fuel you use, how much gas you use. So this time it's 22.1 divided by how far you drove times 100. And when you do that calculation, you're going to get 9.8 liters per 100 kilometers, which makes sense because you're using more gas at 100 kilometers an hour than you are at 60. Okay. However, you're often not going to be driving 60 on the highway. Okay. If you are, you're going to frustrate a lot of people. You'd be driving 60 in the city, but a lot of times your fuel consumption rate is going to be higher when you're driving in the city. Why? Why would it be higher in the city? Right, which means you have to stop and go, right? There's a lot of stop and go driving. Whereas, I mean, you basically, well, you can put on cruise control on the highway, but if you're driving in the city, you got to stop, and then you got to press the accelerator again, you got to stop, and so forth. Okay, so in general, on the highway, you get better fuel consumption. Another example, the odometer. You should be familiar with an odometer. It is on your dashboard by your speed, and it tells you how many kilometers the vehicle has gone. So the odometer of some mid-sized car reads 34,719 at the beginning of a trip and 34,853 at the end. The car consumes 12.4 liters of gas during the trip, and there I've just given you the definition of odometer. So what's the fuel economy, or in other words, the fuel consumption rate? Well, before we do that, we have to find out how far we've gone. And how do we do that? We take the odometer at the end of our trip and subtract the odometer reading at the beginning of the trip and that's going to tell us how far we've driven, which turns out to be 134 kilometers. Because I need the distance driven to put into the fuel consumption formula. So the fuel consumption rate is going to be the amount of liters you use, 12.4, divided by the distance you drive, which we just calculated to be 134, times 100 to convert it for every 100 kilometers. And we get a fuel consumption rate of 9.3 liters. Per 100 kilometers. Okay. Obviously, another question you're interested in is how much gas you use, or how much it costs for gas on your trip. The cost of gas is 112.9 cents per liter. That's usually how they say it at the gas stations. They put it in terms of cents. And usually it's not exact cents. It's usually 0.9. It could be point other numbers, but it's usually 0.9. But basically 112.9 cents per liter. You want to change that to dollars by moving the decimal point 2 to the left. And that's going to give us $1.12 and then 9 after that. So almost $1.13. So the cost of driving 100 kilometers, sorry, I made a mistake. We don't want to know the cost of gas used for this trip. We want to know the cost for 100 kilometers. Okay. So what we have, how much gas did we use for 100 kilometers? Right here. We used 9.3 liters for every 100 kilometers. Times that by the price of gas in dollars. And remember, in dollars, we want to round it to the nearest cent or 2 decimal places. Well, this one actually works out to be $10.50. Okay. Sometimes you may be asked to use the formula to find a missing value that's in the formula. Okay. So here you're given the fuel economy, you're told the driving distance, and you're asked to determine the numbers of liters of gas to drive. So remember, the FCR equals your liters divided by however many kilometers you drive times 100. We are told that the fuel consumption rate is 12 is equal to some liters divided by 252 kilometers that you drive times 100. So you got to think a little algebra. Remember, to get a variable by itself, whatever's around it being multiplied, added, subtracted, divided, we do the inverse. So if I want to get the liters, how do I get rid of divide 252? How do I get rid of it? Come on. How do you get rid of divide 252? How do you get rid of times 100? Divide by 100. So what we want to do is we want to take our answer multiplied by 252 divided by 1,000. We want to do the reverse. And that's going to give us 30.24. That's how many liters we used. Another way you could look at it is set up one of those proportions that you can cross multiply. I know that I can drive 12 liters every 100 kilometers. I want to know how many liters for 252 kilometers. So how do we get rid of the fractions here? We cross multiply. So that means that to find my question mark, I am going to do 12 times 252, and then I'm going to divide by 100, which you notice is the exact same thing that we did. Either method will get you the same answer. Okay? But you do have to be familiar with how to use the formula to find the liters of gas that you used. And now that you've got the liters, you can answer part B. Notice this time you're given the cost in dollars. So all you have to do to calculate the cost of your trip, well, we just found out that we used 30.24 liters. Gas is $1.19 per liter, so we multiply those two to get us the cost of gas, which on this trip was $35.99. So obviously that's something that you have to be mindful of when you're operating a vehicle, is the amount of gas you're using. Okay, because I mean, that's the big expense of operating the vehicle. And another big expense that you could get hit with is maintaining the vehicle. So there are some things that you can do to maintain your vehicle. If you buy a new vehicle or lease a new vehicle, a lot of dealerships, or I would say all dealerships, have a schedule of maintenance that they provide to you. That basically tells you, it gives you a list of when you should get maintenance done to your vehicle and what kind of maintenance should be done. And usually that happens twice a year. Once, say, in the beginning of winter, and once in around spring, summer. One thing that you usually want to get is an oil change. So if you don't have a new vehicle, you got to make sure that you get an oil change usually, what do they say, every 8 to 12,000 kilometers, or they give you a certain time. If you go to a place that does oil changes, they always give you a little sticker to put on your windshield to remind you when you should come in. But oil change is a big one, because if your oil runs out, your engine seizes. And if your engine conks out, that's a big time expense to replace an engine. And a lot of places do this that do oil changes as well as dealerships. But these are some things you want to keep in mind. Check all fluid levels, like your steering wheel fluid, your brake fluid, other types of fluid that allow you to operate the vehicle efficiently. Okay. Your tires, make sure they're properly inflated. Okay. Because if they're not properly inflated, they're going to wear down faster. And tires aren't cheap to replace. If you're going to replace all 4 tires, you're looking at least $1,000. Okay. And then, of course, any leaks and things like that. Okay. But a lot of automotive places do this, private automotive places will do this. If you bought your vehicle privately, like if you bought a used vehicle, I think a lot of times you could just take it into a dealership and get certain things done. Okay, but these are things you want to keep in mind. Eventually, though, you're going to have to get some repairs done, or you're going to have to pay for like an oil change or for new brakes or something like that, or new tires. And really, the only thing you have to worry about is to calculate the cost of repairs is just the PST and GST. Okay, so as an example here, we want to find the total cost, including taxes, of servicing a vehicle that requires new brakes for $149.95 and a new starter that allows you to start your vehicle for $250. So what a place will do when you have to get repairs done is they're going to charge you for two things. They're going to charge you for the parts, and they're going to charge you for the time it takes to replace the parts. In other words, the labor. Okay. So when you take it in and they give you the cost of the parts, don't base your final cost on that. You always want to make sure, so what's the labor? But they'll usually tell you. So for this one, parts, we've got the brakes at $149.95, plus the new starter for $250. Means that for parts, we're going to be paying $399.95. For labor, they're saying 2.6 hours for the labor, times $85 an hour. That means your labor cost is going to be $221. The total cost, well, add your parts and labor. And when you get that answer, to include your taxes, remember we always multiply by 1.12 if we're including both PST and GST. And that's going to give us $695.46. That's how much your repairs are going to cost. Parts, labor, tax. Okay. But you can see labor's a big chunk of it. So you can see here things that will affect the cost of repairing your vehicle. Well, it depends what's wrong with it, where you take it to. Some are more than others. I mean, if you've got a guy, chances are you will pay less than if you take it to a dealership. Usually dealerships charge more. Okay. Whatever the labor rates are, the condition of your vehicle, what year it is, okay. How available are parts, like if you live in a remote location, which we don't have to worry about here, but it's going to cost money to ship the parts there. But another big thing here, something that you might want to be aware of, it's the type of parts that you get. There are two types of parts. Original manufacturer, okay, versus after parts, or aftermarket, pardon me. Okay. Original equipment is built by whoever built the car. So if you buy a Hyundai, okay, and if you go to a Hyundai dealership, they're going to use Hyundai parts, okay? But they don't necessarily have to use them, and a lot of non-dealerships that you go to get a car repaired, they'll use aftermarket parts, which many times are cheaper because other companies can make the same parts cheaper. But you have to be careful because, I mean, there's a trade-off there, right? If they're cheaper, maybe they're not as high quality as an original manufacturer quote, which will cost you more. Okay, so it's a bit of a trade-off there. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, finally, depreciation. Depreciation means when something loses value. Okay? So vehicles depreciate. When we talked about houses in Unit 1, they appreciate. Usually, there are some sort of general figures as to how much a vehicle depreciates per year. We're going to use 20% a year. Okay? Just keep it simple there. So basically, the vehicle's value is going to be 20% less than it was the previous year. Yeah, come on in. What's that? Tomorrow, I don't have any classes from 9:30 to 1 o'clock. Today, I've got classes all the way through. Yeah? Yeah. So 9:30 tomorrow. Okay, thanks. Okay. So we've got the sale price of a car is $38,500. We want to calculate how much the car depreciates in the third year. So what we do, we've got to sort of keep a running list. So in the first year, after the first year, to find the depreciation, we take the value of the car, and we said it's going to depreciate 20%, so we're going to multiply it by 20% in decimal form. And we're going to get 7,700. That's how much it depreciates. Therefore, the new value after 1 year is going to be the original value, 38,500, minus how much it depreciated, 7,700. It's going to be worth 30,800 at the end of the first year that you own it. Then we continue that for the second year. We take the value of the car, which remember is now 30,800, and figure out how much it depreciates by timesing by 0.2, and we get 6,160. To find the value after year 2, I take the value at the beginning of year 2, which was 30,800, minus how much it depreciated during year two, and I get a value of $24,640. Finally, third year, well, to find the depreciation, which I'm asked, that's all I'm asked to find. I take the value after year 2, which is now 24,640, and I multiply that by 0.2, and that's going to get me how much the vehicle depreciates after year 3, which is 4,928. So that's how much it goes down. Notice that the depreciation value decreases every year because the vehicle's worth less every year. So what's the value of the car after the third year in B? Well, we take the value after the second year, or at the beginning of the third year, 24,640. and subtract how much it depreciated that third year, which was 4928, means our depreciation was $19,712. Or sorry, that's the value of the car. And finally, calculate how much the car depreciates after 3 years. There's a couple ways you can do this. If you want to find out how much it depreciates after 3 years, you can do one of two things. You can add these. That's how much it depreciates after first year, second year, third year. Or take the original value of the car minus the value of the car after the third year. It's going to give you the same answer. So you can do how much it depreciates after the first year, plus how much it depreciates after the second year, plus how much it depreciates after the third year, and add those together to get 18,788. Or take the original value of the car, which was 38.5, subtract the value of the car after year 3, which we just calculated above to be 19,712, and you're going to get the same thing. Either way will get you the same answer. Okay. And like I said here, mentioned before, the amount of depreciation goes down every year because you're taking 20% of a smaller value every year. So let's just look at a couple last examples, which also tie into what we did in the earlier lessons in this unit, because it's going to be important to know these, to know how to use a table and things like that. So we've got a minivan that sells for $28,500, and it also leases for $479 plus taxes per month for a lease term of 24 months. So down payment of $42.75 is required. The guaranteed residual value of the vehicle is 65% of the sale price. So what we want to do is find the guaranteed residual value of the minivan. That's our first step. So the first thing we do to figure out 65% of 28.5. That will give us the residual value, which is going to give us $18,525. So that's, remember, residual value goes with when you lease. So that's how much the vehicle is worth after 2 years. If you bought the vehicle and it depreciated 20% per year, how much would the vehicle be worth after 2 years? Well, remember, it goes down 20%. So we've got to take 20% of 28.5, and we get 5,700. And then we've got to subtract that from 28.5 minus 5,700. And after year 1, the vehicle is worth 22.8. Okay, so this is year 1. Year 2, we're going to take the value of the vehicle at the end of year 1, 22.8, take 20% of that to get 45.60, and we're going to subtract that from 22.8. And that's going to give us 18,240. Slightly less than the guaranteed residual value that we calculated in A. So that's the comparison between the two. Okay. So how does the depreciated value of the vehicle after 2 years? Slightly less. Only by like $300. Okay. But remember that 18,240 that's left after 2 years depreciation, you've paid for that vehicle. It's still your vehicle. That guaranteed residual value, that 18,525, that's how much, after 2 years, you got to give that vehicle up, or you got to buy it for 18,525. All right, this is kind of funny. Gasoline. Purchases, should say purchases, a new convertible for $16,980. Wow, that's pretty cheap, including all fees and taxes. He makes a down payment of $3,500, finances the remainder with a 36-month loan at 8.25%. During the first year, Gaz drives his convertible 15,045 kilometers. He estimates the fuel economy to be 9.6 liters for every 100 kilometers, and the average cost of gas is $1.29. Using that amortization table that you've got on the next page, calculate the total loan payments Gaz makes during his first year he owns his convertible. Okay. First of all, how much does he need to borrow? How do you figure out how much he needs to borrow? What's that? Not yet. The amount of the loan. Before we calculate how much he's going to pay, how much is the loan itself? How much is the vehicle? How much does he put down? $3,500. So the amount of the loan is going to be $16,980, and that includes all taxes. We're not going to have to worry about calculating those. Minus how much he puts down. So he's got to take a loan out for $13,480. Now we want to figure out how much he pays a month, and we've got to use the amortization table. So how much does he pay for every 1,000? If it's, what is it, 36 months at 8.25? 36 months at 8.25. 36 months is 3 years. 8.25 means he's got to pay $31.34 for every $1,000 of loan. So that means 3 years at 8.25%. It's going to be $31.45 for every 1,000. So to figure out his monthly payment, I got to take the amount of his loan, $13,480. Figure out how many thousands are in that. How do you figure out how many thousands are in that? You divide 1,000. And every 1,000 costs $31.45. So that means his monthly payment is going to be $423.95. But notice the question asks, how much does he pay in 1 year? Well, if it's $423.95 a month, 1 year it's going to be $423.95 times 12. That means he's going to pay $5,087.40. Yeah. This is for 8. Yeah. Yeah, I ran out of space. And finally, calculate the total gasoline costs he has during his first year of driving this convertible. Well, the total cost of gas is going to be, now remember, we're trying to find out, we're given the fuel consumption rate. Okay. And we're also given the distance driven. So to find the total cost, we're going to take the total distance he's driven. And remember, it's every 100 kilometers. So I need to find how many 100 kilometers are in 15,045. I divide it by 100. Then times that by the fuel consumption rate. Okay. Once we figure this out, okay, because remember, the missing thing here is how many liters. Like how many liters did he use? This is going to calculate how many liters in 1 year. And that was very similar to a problem we did earlier, where we have to do, if we're given the fuel consumption rate, we got to do the reverse. Instead of times in the 1,000, we got to divide 1,000. And then we got to times by the fuel consumption rate. Okay. So that gives us the liters. And then, of course, we have to, what is it, $1.29? Multiply that by $1.29 to get the total cost. So that's going to give us $1,863.17. So gas is a big price of running a vehicle. It's a big cost. Another way you could have figured it out, you could have done the two fractions. Well, he gets 9.6 for every 100. I want to know how many liters over 15,450. And then to get that, you would do 9.6 times 15,045 divided by 100, which is the exact same calculation we did here. And that would give you the number of liters, right? So which actually works out to 1,444.32 liters. And then you times that by 1.29 to get the total cost of gas, which is obviously going to work out the same. when we did it the other way. So there's two methods. You can set up a proportion, fraction on each side of the equation, or you can do the calculations in reverse to figure out the number of liters from the formula. Okay? So those are the things, yeah.
Is it like
1,444.32 liters. So the L for liters.
Why does the second one not have another word?
Why does the second one have what? Under?
Like after the equation.
Yeah.
It also has 4,000.
Oh, thank you. Yes, you're right. Okay. So the last thing that we need to talk about, and it'll be pretty straightforward, is just insuring a vehicle. But I wonder if how much you guys know about it. I guess we'll see. We'll talk about it. How many, does anybody have any merits on their license? Not yet? Do you start getting them after year one? How many years have you been driving? One? 1 year. Has it been 1 year yet or not quite 1 year? Okay, so you haven't hit 1 year yet. So you'll probably get your merits starting your 12 months. Okay. Anyway, we'll talk about that later.